All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I've been so excited to finally start the advisory council meeting. I could not contain myself. It's been a long time coming, definitely. So without further ado, we will move on to a presentation just to get us kicked off. All right. So the role of the advisory council, and comes directly from Senate Bill 222, is to provide advice and make recommendations regarding establishing and implementing a producer responsibility program in the state for packaging materials. Uh, so as you're going to see, we have a very extremely diverse group of stakeholders who are on the who are members of the sitting members on the advisory council. We also have folks that are invited that aren't on the advisory council that are going to be bringing in their perspectives. And when we are developing a law that is as impactful as what this is likely to be, it's very important to get different perspectives when we are making these recommendations, which are ultimately going to inform an EPR law that will likely happen in the 2025 legislative session. And we do have some folks that are newer to the recycling world. So I'm just going to explain a little bit of what EPR is, or extended producer responsibility. You're going to hear that a lot. It's a policy that tries to shift some of the burden of funding recycling infrastructure from the taxpayer through taxes to producers, essentially the producers of whatever the product is. Now, there's a lot of EPR out there. There's EPR for electronics, there's EPR for tires, there's probably going to be some EPR for solar panels. This is specifically for packaging materials right here. And then the producers would help fund some of the infrastructure for that recycling. So it's not all on the taxpayer. All right, so today's agenda, we're going to go through introductions, schedule, expected outcomes. We haven't picked our co-chairs yet, so we're going to take some recommendations for the co-chairs, and by law, we're supposed to have 2 of them. We are going to give a quick needs assessment update, which I'm sure there's a lot of folks on this call who are very interested on the status of that. Then CAA, or Circular Action Alliance, which is our producer responsibility organization, and they represent the producers and are going to be helping us implement this EPR policy when it becomes effective. And CAA is going to be talking about the Colorado needs assessment. So there's some states that are going through that have started this process already. Colorado, Oregon, California, Maine. I heard that there might be another one that just passed some legislation this legislative cycle, but I forget what that date is.
Minnesota, I think it is.
Is it Minnesota? Okay.
No,
Cool.
it's Minnesota.
It is Minnesota.
All right, cool. So I actually stood on a meeting with all of the states where we try and coordinate and have some consistency between the states as well. And then CAA is also going to be talking about some of the differences and approaches with the other states too. Then Chaz Miller is going to be giving a market update on for different recyclable materials. This is important because As some of you may or may not know, the recycling markets for recyclable materials, it's kind of like a not a seesaw, but a roller coaster. Sometimes prices are good, sometimes they're not so good, and that can really impact the how much supply and demand there is for recycling as well. And then we are required to open up the meeting to the public. That is something that's part of public meeting law, and then we will have closing remarks after that. So typically these first meetings, a lot of introductions, and then everyone, it's like, I don't know, 45 minutes, and then everyone kind of disperses. We have a lot to get through in this advisory council, so we're going to have some presentations, and which will hopefully set a really good foundation for the rest of the meetings that we have. All right. So I will actually, this is our list of advisory council members. We have 21 of them. I am going to start at the top just so that we can get through introductions quickly. And then we will go to introductions of non-advisory council members. So is Lee Zimmerman on the call? Oh, and if you could just say who you are with, who you're representing, and maybe give a little bit about what your expectations or expected outcomes of this of these meetings are going to be as well. So is Lee Zimmerman on the call?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, you good?
Yeah, Lee Zimmerman, Deputy Director, Frederick County Division of Solid Waste and Recycling. We're very interested in this bill and what happens going forward to bring some of this back to the producers as we think it should be. So very, very excited about it.
And just a comment, Lee Zimmerman is actually going to be representing, or is representing Mako as well. Since we had a limited amount of seats on the council, on the council, we were looking at Mako to kind of fill that role so that we can get representation statewide from the different counties. All right, is John Nyman on the line?
Yeah, John Nyman, Municipal Services Manager for Republic Services. I'm also the current Vice President for the Maryland chapter of SWANA. And just to conserve time, since there's a lot of people to speak, I kind of concur with Lee's comments earlier.
All right, Frankie Sherman.
Frankie Sherman. I work with Charles County Government, Environmental Resources Division.
All right, Chris Pilzer.
Hey, Brad. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Know a lot of you on the call. Looking forward to meeting the others. I'm Director of Sustainable Growth for WM, formerly known as Waste Management. We operate 2 recycling facilities in the state of Maryland. If not the biggest, one of the biggest recyclers in the state, one in Baltimore, and then, also in Elkridge, Maryland. My expectations are, who's going to own the material? Where's it going to? What other materials do we want to recycle? Those type of questions get answered. But I really look forward to this process and look forward to the interaction. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Eileen Cow. Okay, it doesn't look like we have her on. Angie Webb. All right, moving on. Vinny Bevavino. All right, moving on. Michael or Cobrafor.
I'm sorry, I think I was on mute. Vinny is here.
Oh.
Sorry about that. Vinny Bevavino, Bioenergy DevCo. I'm the Senior Director of Organics. We are a food waste recycler anaerobic digester in Howard County in Jessup, Maryland. I expect to be looking at and contributing to food waste food packaging and its recyclability, particularly with depackaging equipment.
And Angie, I'm going to go back to you. I see that you're online also.
Can you hear me? I wasn't
Yeah,
sure.
you're good.
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Angie Webb with Maryland Environmental Service. I'm the Chief of Recycled Products and Marketing. I pretty much second what everyone says. I'm really excited to see, what's going to happen here and how we can help navigate through all of this.
All righty, Michael.
Hey, great job pronouncing my last name, Brad. I think you got it. So kudos there. Good morning,
Oh, I
everybody.
thought I butchered it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Okorafor, the Chief Sustainability Officer for McCormick and Company. Really a pleasure to see this esteemed group working on this important initiative for the state and for most of us. So really, my expectation is that we will get to some of the things we've seen globally. As you know, we operate in over 160 different countries, and EPR is something that we've partnered in France and done it successfully. So some of the things I'll be doing is making sure we bring in some of the global successes and see how we can tailor it here, because this is important for our state. And we have to lead with a very purposeful EPR. And that's why I'm really excited with this work. Thanks.
All right, Ellen Valentino.
Thank you. I'm excited as well. Ellen Valentino. I represent the Maryland, Delaware, DC Beverage Association. Just a little background. We're the state's largest manufacturer. Collectively have 6 operating facilities here in the state. I think maybe there may not be another state that has as many beverage manufacturers fully operating. So we look forward to the conversation. We look forward to helping formulate good recommendations that's going to help the state move forward around recycling, and also help our members recover their beverage products as well. So again, happy to be here. I think we can bring a lot to the table, both from a manufacturing perspective, nationally and internationally. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is Mario Minor on? Okay, moving on. Actually, before I move on, so Mario is representing our retailer and small business. He has a very fascinating story. Don't want to get too much into it, but he's going to be filling that role. All right, Scott DeFife.
Good morning, Scott DeFife, the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. Before glass, I worked a little bit in plastics in the restaurant and retail sector. I am here to help Maryland shape a EPR proposal that will improve the system, get better quality material back to the end market manufacturers who need it as a raw material, and avoid recyclables going to landfills.
All right, Dan Felton.
Yeah, thank you, Bradley. Good morning, everyone. Dan Felton, Executive Director of AmeriPen, the American Institute for Packaging and Environment. If you're not familiar with AmeriPen, we represent the entire packaging value chain in a material inclusive manner, all materials, and that includes material suppliers, packaging manufacturers, brand owners, retailers, and recyclers as well. Super excited to be working on this as a 30-year Maryland resident and deeply involved across the country, including in Maryland on the legislative side of things, but also we're deeply involved in helping to implement the new laws around the country. The needs assessment, in our view, is critical. It's got to be done right and thorough, and the process that we're setting forward in Maryland, I think it's exciting. Looking forward to working with everyone to get that base set. So if a future law comes in Maryland, it could be set up for the greatest success possible. Thanks, Bradley.
All right, thank you. Abigail Stein.
Good morning. Thanks so much for including me in this. I am the Executive Director of Recovered Fiber for the American Forest and Paper Association. It's the National Trade Association representing pulp, paper, and packaging manufacturers. And I'm also a lifelong Marylander. And so the ability for this project to collect all of the data and really have robust information to inform any future policy for the state of Maryland, I think is crucial in order to move projects forward in a way that is productive and effective.
All right. Next is Delphine Dahan.
You can do it.
Coker?
Dahan Coker. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Great job. No worries. Hi. So my name is Delphine. I'm working for Constellium, VP Public Affairs. Constellium is an international company based in Baltimore doing aluminum. And so one of the main products we're doing is cans. And so we need can back to make our product. So we're obviously very interested in recycling and very interested in what we can do to increase recycling in Maryland.
All righty, thank you. Peter Hargreave.
Yeah, hi, Peter Hargreave. I work with Circular Action Alliance, which, as you mentioned, Brad, is the producer responsibility organization that has been set up by producers to implement across different states in the U.S. I have about 20 years experience in the development, implementation, and oversight of EPR policies across North America. Looking forward to this process and hoping to bring sort of lessons learned and feedback from the pro as this project moves forward.
All right, Chad Miller.
Hi, I'm Chaz Miller. I'm Legislative Director for the Maryland, Committee Chair for the Maryland Recycling Network. Been involved in recycling since 1976 when I was with EPA's original recycling program, worked for the glass industry and worked for the recycling and hauling industry. And I chair the Northeast Recycling Council's Recycling Markets Task Force. And I'm looking forward to making sure that the needs assessment covers Maryland's unique infrastructure, including 3 publicly owned and 3 privately owned MRFs, and the reliance of the Eastern Shore on the MRF in Delaware.
All right, thank you. Sherry Wilson.
Hi, so I'm filling in for Sherry Wilson today. I'm Milan McWilliams. I'm a social media marketing consultant with Trash for Maryland. Trash for Maryland's only advocacy organization solely working on trash and litter in the state of Maryland. I've been with them for 2 years. Sherry Wilson is the Trash for Maryland Executive Director, and she is the former head of the Maryland Department of the Environment. She worked there for 20 plus years. She started many projects like the voluntary cleanup program from scratch, and that's all in order to say, like, we have experience setting up these like totally new programs and implementing them in a way that works across the state. So we've been working with EPR since 2021, and we've held numerous like learning sessions, meeting with staff in other states and national experts, all in to better inform ourselves in our coalition. We have a coalition of 90 partners, ranging from a handful of individuals to small organizations and all the way to national advocacy organizations. So we're looking forward to this discussions and recommendations and the insights the advisory council can produce in order to create the best EPR bill in the nation. So thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we're on Martha Ainsworth.
Yes, hi, everyone. I'm Martha Ainsworth, and I see my camera isn't working yet. There we go, it should be working. I'm representing the Sierra Club, a Maryland chapter with over 70,000 members and supporters in the state. I'm the chair of the statewide zero waste team, and we are interested in getting the best in class EPR for packaging bill that not only addresses recycling, which is very important, but reducing packaging and redesigning and encouraging reuse and redesign of packaging to make it more recyclable. And I'd like to echo the interest in looking at best practices worldwide and not just in the United States, where there's a lot more experience outside the US. Thank you. Looking forward to meeting all the members in person at some point.
And Martha, I think you'll be happy with some of the speakers that we are anticipating lining up for this.
Excellent. Thank you.
We are getting some international folks, hopefully. Okay, Crystal Faison.
Faison, yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal Faison. I am the president and CEO of Shepherd Design and Construction. I am a known housing advocate. We provide energy efficiency services as well as construction services for Marylanders. Thank you.
All right, Miguel Lambert.
Yes, good morning. Miguel Lambert, managing partner of Repurpose Aggregates.
It is a little bit hard to hear you, just FYI.
I'm sorry. I am managing partner of Repurpose Aggregates, which is located in Harford County, Maryland. We focus on the construction market, so trying to recycle and repurpose materials that are coming off of construction, renovations, and debris. We strongly believe in building a more circular economy around those materials, because as our landfills are becoming shorter and shorter, and also aggregate material needed for building new buildings are having a shortage as well, increasing the prices of development. So we just want to focus on a more circular economy, and looking forward to helping everywhere we can.
All right, finally, and Gurcharan Singh. Okay, don't know if he is on. All right. Thank you very much. As you can see, we have a very respectable bunch of advisory council members and from all parts of the industry. And I expect that we're going to have a very great conversation around this. Now, for the non-member introductions, we do have a lot of material. So if folks can put their names and their affiliations and their expectations in the chat, that will be great. Just so you know, we will also open this up to the public after we get through the main agenda items as well.
And Brad, if you don't mind, I'm trying to track everyone who's here that's required. And a couple things came up when I'm going over the list that I have a couple questions just to clarify. There is one person that's logged on and they're logged on as unknown. Do you know if that would be you and what your name would be so I can track that, please? Nobody's going to claim the unknown login. Okay. There is also someone in with the 610 phone number, ends in 43. No one's going to claim that one. Okay. And then I will look at the list of everyone else that's putting their names up to clarify anybody else on my list. But if no one's claiming those, that's Brad. I guess that's what they'll go down on the list as.
Chris, I see you had your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Dave, just a quick question. This presentation will be able to access online, or this will be distributed to the members?
Yeah, so you will we will be posting the presentation and the recording and the recording online as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, well, now we're going to be moving on to our tentative schedule for these work groups. We're going to be giving updates on the needs assessment at each one of our meetings. We also have a bunch of speakers that we have lined up and are lining up. most of these folks who are the potential speakers, they're very interested. We're just trying to line up dates, and some of these speakers might have to move depending on schedules and whatnot. So and then of course we're going to have an open discussion at all of these meetings, and then we will end with public opening it to the public. Now, if there's some topics that folks think that really should be included in this, if you can just send me what that topic would be and a potential speaker, that would be helpful as well, so that the rest of the group can get a better understanding of that. We can see where we can work them in. For the November meetings, I'm anticipating those all being about the needs assessment and writing the report and all of that fun stuff that comes along with that. And Ellen.
Hi, yeah, just a quick flag, and maybe now's not the time. I mean, the needs assessment is not underway. It's just something to consider. It would be unusual given the way things have operated in the other states that a needs assessment would even be complete by November. But just a flag and a mention on that.
Yes.
Thanks, Bradley. Thank you.
Totally understand that. And we will be getting to the needs assessment later in the presentation as well. Milan?
I'll reserve it for later then. I was about the needs assessment as well. But
Yeah. Cool. All right. So at our next meeting that we're planning on having in July, we have Scott Council with PSI. I believe he's on the line. He may not be. And then we are also trying to line up Mary Cummins, who is implementing EPR in Canada. And Canada's actually been doing this for quite some time. They have a lot of scar tissue in implementing these programs. So I think having that perspective would be very informative for this group. We do have 4 states that are a little bit further ahead, but they haven't actually implemented yet. Mary Cummins has, and that's going to be very helpful for this group's understanding and helping to inform the law in Maryland. Michael.
Thanks, Brad. I just want to ask a simple question, maybe something we should think about is really with the end in mind. What would be the type of time frame required to develop and draft, legislative language in consideration for the General Assembly before the session begins? Have you thought through that?
We've been thinking through that. And just general comment, if we could hold additional comments until Bradley's able to make it through the schedule, just so that we can get that out of the way. But, we're probably going to take the previous bill as a baseline. So there is, significant drafting already done on that, and then talk about how we want to tweak it, maybe what we want to be different. People might have different perspectives on that, so we can get that input as we're working through it. But also as part of the needs assessment, the organization that is chosen needs to be able to provide us with recommendations and draft language as well. So, we're going to keep pushing to try to make these timelines because they're the timelines that we were given. And so I'm going to do my best.
Hey, Tyler, thanks.
Of course.
All right. And then for September 26th, we're going to have Chris Tichet. And this is someone who actually approached us with some concerns and made some comments that not all packaging actually goes into either a single stream or dual stream collection system, and that's some of the products that they work with. So there's some other countries that have taken that into consideration, these types of packaging that don't go through the traditional recycling collection process. I think the one that they brought up in particular was like the bottles when you get your oil changed, they and you're recycling the oil, but then you also have the container as well. Those typically are not going into your single or dual stream. So it's just something that we have to consider when we are going through this. Then there's going to be we reached out to Reed let's set. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he's a professor at Yale, and I saw him at the one of the NERC conferences, and he did a presentation on ecomodulation, and we're going to get into what exactly ecomodulation is. And I thought it was pretty fantastic. And in his presentation, he was also dispelling a lot of myths and rumors about EPR as well. So there's sometimes you'll hear something and it may sound intuitive, but when you actually or correct, but if you actually look at the data, which is what he is doing, it actually doesn't play out when you look at the data and do the research on this. So on October 24th, as I said, there were 4 other states that are kind of going beforehand. Some of them have, I believe, finished their rulemaking process, or they're right in the middle of this. None of them have actually implemented. I put them later in the schedule because I was hoping they'd be a little bit further along in their implementation schedule. But there's a lot of learning that has been done by these 4 states. There's a lot of scar tissue that they're going to be rubbing, and I'm hoping that that's going to be a great conversation right there, because they're living it right now, definitely. And then what's also, and we haven't quite reached out to these folks because we do have a little bit of time to set this up, but hoping to get some speakers that actually represent different packaging material types, because the markets are different depending on what type of material you're dealing with, whether it's plastic, glass, paper, compostable materials as well. We've been hearing a lot about that. So just wanted to have a panel conversation on what are some of the different considerations for those different material types, and how do you handle that in an EPR system. That's also going to be something that the Producer Responsibility Organization, they're going to be largely tasked to trying to figure that out, but still it's something that we need to consider when we are developing this program. So, and then again, November on, it's going to be mostly needs assessment and drafting up the reports to be submitted to the General Assembly. Any questions on this schedule, things we should consider in this schedule, potential speakers? Again, if you have, you can always send me that later, and then I can talk with Tyler, and then we can try and reach out and get those scheduled. Yeah, Milan?
I think you might actually have this, but for speakers, we think that David Alloway would be a great one from Oregon.
Yes, and I think the email that I sent
you might have had it
as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
again, I do sit on a group with the different states where they talk about definitions, where they talk about how can we coordinate so that we don't have like vastly different laws that are out there, because the reality is a lot of these companies that are going to be playing in this space are national, international companies, and it's going to be difficult to have 50 different rule books. So there is an effort to try and coordinate and make it a little bit easier to comply with these laws that are definitely going to be coming down the pike. Unknown? I think we know who unknown is. Oh, you are muted.
I had my hand up. I don't think I'm unknown, but just a quick question regarding the schedule. Is it still the intention to have all these meetings virtual, or are you planning on having any of these in person?
Excuse me, can I ask your name? Because I can't see who you are because you're marked as unknown.
Oh, geez, I thought I wanted John Nyman with Republic Services. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
So the intention is we have a lot of people in this group. It's one of the larger working groups that we have. So the intent is to keep these virtual, and then we can also save a little bit on our emissions as well. Michael?
Yeah, Brad, I was wondering by the October 24th needs assessment update, if you could reach out to Minnesota, because their EPR bill is really, in my opinion, something very well done. So to see if we can add them as presenters.
Yeah, I will. I'll definitely reach out. And if you have a contact, because they aren't in my list or in the group that or if someone has a contact that they can send me for that, I can reach out to Minnesota. Milan?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know a few people brought it up already as well, but if possible, Trash for Maryland also maybe to do in person at some point. We're also in support of that. I know that a few people brought it up, and I know that you said there's a lot of people, but I just wanted to throw that out there that we would be interested in it if it's a possibility.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can take a look at for a future meeting. Okay. Seeing no more hands, I'm going to move on to the next part of our agenda. Okay, so as I said before, we actually have not selected our co-chairs for this. So we actually wanted to canvass the group and maybe take some recommendations. Who would be interested in being a co-chair? Being co-chair isn't that difficult. Typically, you help kick off the meeting. In some cases, help guide the conversation. And if there's a tussle, which is rare, maybe step in and help out with that, facilitate that conversation. So do we have any recommendations for co-chairs?
Hi,
I
this
think
is
I saw
Ellen.
Ellen first and
Yeah,
then Milan.
sure. Just a recommendation. I do think it's going to be important to have one of the co-chairs, either the pro or maybe McCormick, somebody who is very specific in the packaging industry and a foothold in Maryland and understands that. And looking at the advisory council, I think the pro would be the one, but then, I haven't discussed this with McCormick, but I do think it's important that one of them, given the policies that come out and the impacts that it could have, I think that they would be a good co-chair that would align with the county, maybe environmental service, or if somebody else comes forward. So my recommendation is, a packaging entity, McCormick or the pro. Thank you.
All right. What do you say, Michael?
It's tough when you have Ellen put me on the spot and you try to call me out. What do you expect me to say? It is the right thing, Ellen. I appreciate that. So yeah, I'm all in.
All right. And just for the group here too, the final decisions are made by the secretary. So Bradley and I are going to take this one take
Yes,
all the
yes.
names back and discuss that with Secretary McElwain. But I will certainly have you on the list, Michael.
All right, Milan.
I just wanted to reiterate we've expressed interest in being a co-chair before, and we still are very interested and happy to do it. We're the only advocacy group in Maryland that solely deals with trash and litter, and we've had experience in the past with our exec director Sherry Wilson. She the voluntary cleanup program in Maryland. She's had experience in setting up these types of programs from scratch and having them work across the state. So we're still interested in throwing our hat in there for co-chair.
Thank you.
All right. Any other recommendations? Chris?
Hey, Brad. I think there's a lot of good candidates on here for sure, but I think it's also important to either have a processor or one of the collectors as a co-chair, because they're going to be, the people implementing a lot of the services to the municipality. So I just, nobody is specific, but I just wanted to throw that out there to have a, a fair and balanced representation.
Right. I think just adding to that, I don't think I have a little bit of a hearing problem, so I don't want to I'm sorry if you didn't call on me, Bradley.
No, you're good.
I just want to, again, push forward along that comment that I think it's important that a county be represented and or Maryland Environmental Service. Just something, I have no name to nominate, but in looking in the other states and how this plays out, the packagers are key stakeholders and participants, but as are the importance of having that buy-in and partnership on the next level from a county. Not necessarily, not necessarily from a waste, perspective, but it is the county that as well. So it's just a recommendation, trying to look full circle. Thanks.
Yes, and something that we're probably going to take a look at is again having the balance with this. And right now we have 4 recommendations, and we only have 2 seats, just to keep that in mind. But that is something that we're going to be looking at when we have these conversations with the secretaries.
Does anybody who meets that last description want to volunteer to put their name in the hat?
An environmental service. I would be glad to be on the chair, the co-chair.
This is Chris from WM. I would support Ian's recommendation.
And then in the comments, I saw that Chaz Miller was the recommendation.
I think that while the Maryland Recycling Network would be very happy to be a co-chair, I think Angie would also be excellent.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We will take this list to our secretary, who will have the final decision on this. All right. I told you we'd be talking about it. The recycling needs assessment update. It's been a lot going on. Let's just say that. So at this point, I think we have narrowed down a decision. We have not made that official yet. There are still some other parts of the process that we need to take into consideration in the selection process. My apologies for being very vague on this. There's some things that we just, as a part of the selection process, we just can't talk about by law. But we are hoping to actually extend that offer out very soon. Very, very soon.
And just to add a little bit too, so people understand timelines, the final awardee needs to be approved by the Board of Public Works. And so that adds additional timeline into this matter, but we hope to have this, sorted out as soon as possible. Ellen?
Yeah, on that, I was just going to ask that. Just again, it's just a flag, but that doesn't mean we should not move forward with the timeline laid out. In the other states, the needs assessment is extensive. If it's awarded in the next couple of weeks, goes before the Board of Public Works. Needs assessment terms actually get in. It would be surprising if a needs assessment could even get into the market before October. I could be very wrong on that. But it's just a flag. We always have these requirements, but just like the needs assessment funding, if we're incomplete, then we're incomplete. Just, I think we need to have open minds about this just going forward. But great news. I appreciate it.
And just a comment on that, with the Colorado needs assessment, they actually didn't or don't collect data that Maryland does that are already in our recycling report. So one of the things that and you can read our RFP, it talks about this. One of the things that we wanted to do is, if the data already existed, we pointed people to the report because we didn't want to pay for developing a survey, sending those out, giving people 45 days to fill them out. So there are some parts that are a little bit different than Colorado's that may speed up the actual development of Maryland's needs assessment because of the extensive reporting that is already happening in the state of Maryland. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I know there's a queue. Who was first?
I think Scott, then Milan, then Dan, then Ed.
I was just gonna put up my hand to say if we can move on. Ellen, I know that you're concerned about the timing of the needs assessment, but I think what Bradley just said is true. There are things that Maryland has going already that will help speed it along. I am slightly concerned on time getting to the end of the year to get a legislative package looked at that can do this, but we have an hour.
Yeah, we need our presentations. Just real quickly, Milan, Dan, Chaz.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up Oregon. They've done a needs assessment and they're planning to do a second one later after passing. So there's always an opportunity to do another or more and learn lessons from the first.
Yeah.
So
That's true. And one of the reasons why we wanted CEA to talk about the Colorado one too is that there's already learning out there. Maryland yet does have some things that are unique, but we wanted to make sure we get that information in front of people. I think Dan and then Chaz.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Just a quick comment, and maybe could come to us via email or at a later date. It would be helpful if we could get a review at some point of the statutory deadlines around the needs assessment, around the recommendation to make to the legislature. I have in my head, I feel like we're already behind a little bit. I could be wrong about that. Again, we don't have to belabor it today, but if we could get a rundown on the key dates just to keep track of so we know where we are at in the timing process.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How about we follow up with an email? We'll lay out the timelines. Certainly hear you. There's a lot of things that were, I don't want to say, not in our favor, but we're working on it. All right, Chaz?
Just a thought, it's better to do it right than to do it fast.
Yes, absolutely.
Agree.
All right. So I think we had CAA first and then Chaz. I'm not married to who goes first, but we're going to move on to the presentation portion of our meeting. Oh, and we are going to give some people some homework. So please be sure to to read these documents. They're fascinating.
Chaz, I'm happy
Chaz,
either way if you want to present first or us. I don't have a preference.
Why don't you go ahead, Peter? That's fine.
Perfect. And I don't know if my colleague John Height, who's on the call, might be able to. I don't know if he can come off mute. He was going to just present the first couple of slides.
Hey, Pete, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, John.
All right. Bradley, I'm going to do my best to try and share slides here. How's that? Are you all able to see?
Yeah, we're good.
Awesome. All right. Well, first off, just want to say thank you all for thanks MD for giving us time here to present. Looking forward to sharing some of our insights and learning from Colorado. Also just want to say, we're really pleased to have been selected to be the pro here in Maryland, and looking forward to working with all of you and sharing some of our learnings and insights from some of the other states where we've been active over the past couple of months. We've dove in deep here in Colorado and California and Oregon as well, and have been hard at work getting these programs off the ground in other states. So really excited to be able to share some of that background and learning with you all. I'm just going to jump through a couple of slides here, overviewing some of the background on CAA, where we've been, give you a bit of a state update, a bit of a producer engagement update, and then I'll flip it to Pete to walk us through an update from an update and background on the needs assessment in Colorado, some of the learnings there. And he's also going to do a bit of an overview of the statute in Colorado, just to ground us in the requirements of that law around sort of the function of it, and how the needs assessment will support the development of a program plan there. So there's our agenda, just walked through that. In terms of just a little bit of background here on CAA, so CAA is a 501c3 nonprofit. 4 out of the 5 states that, 5 out of the 6 states that have a pro requirement in them, including Maryland in that list, even though Maryland does not yet have a full program, require the pro to be a 501c3 nonprofit. CAA was formed in response to the passage of Maine and Oregon's programs a couple of years ago. The goal was really to create an organization here that would be able to be adaptable and flexible and meet the requirements of these state laws as they come online. So the 501c3 status here, meets the requirements of several of the state laws. One of the states, Maine, does not require that the pro be a 501c3 nonprofit, but it's not restricted to organizations that are. The 20 companies you see on the screen here are the founding members of CAA. They're focused in the food, beverage, CPG, and retail industries, but we've got a couple folks in the beauty industry as well. By no means is this the sum total of companies that are involved with CAA and providing input and insight into the organization. We're working with trade associations, companies big and small, that are representative of sectors, all the different sectors that are impacted by EPR. We recognize that EPR across the states, the definition of packaging differs a bit, definition of obligated producer differs a bit. But regardless of how that definition shakes out in different states, there's a huge diversity of different companies and organizations that are impacted here. So we've really been doing our best to get in touch with as many of the different entities that are impacted from the obligated producer side as we can, to make sure that we're engaged, that we're bringing their insights and points of view into the implementation process, as well as working with all of the other stakeholders that are involved in EPR across the states, including local governments, ENGOs, state government, obviously, and of course the waste and recycling industry as well. We have been approved as the pro in California and Colorado. Colorado was the first this time last year, and California we were approved in January of this year. We were also the only pro to submit a program plan in Oregon. Oregon does not have a formal pro approval process. Their pro approval process is synonymous with approval of a program plan. We expect that program plan to be approved sometime in November or December of this year. We're currently going through a major revision process of that program plan with the state and many of the stakeholders in Oregon. However, we were the only pro to submit a program plan on April 1st, 2024. So we fully expect that when that program plan is approved, we'll be the only pro in Oregon as well. And of course, we were approved in October of last year to be the single pro in Maryland. I mentioned that CAA from the outset, one of the guiding goals of the organization was to create a flexible and adaptable compliance organization across states. So at the national level, CAA, the goal really is to create a single point of compliance for producers so that producers don't have to work with a different organization across the different states. However, we also recognize that every state is different. The recycling markets are different, the recycling infrastructure is different, and the EPR laws are generally different. So, the organization will be incorporating subsidiary organizations in every state where CAA is approved. And those subsidiary organizations then will be the primary point of interface for all the different stakeholders in that state, and hopefully is going to be able to bridge the national national and regional markets of producers with the local requirements and local expectations and local capacity of recycling systems in each state. Just in terms of a quick update here across the states. So looking at Colorado, like I said, CAA was approved in Colorado on May 1st of last year. Pete's going to go in depth into the requirements of the statute and into the needs assessment, including a little bit of a background, but the needs assessment in Colorado was the primary first undertaking. Again, every state's a bit different here. In Maryland, in California, in Oregon, the state agency has taken the lead on developing out the needs assessment. In Colorado, CAA, as the approved pro, took the lead on developing out the needs assessment. We did that through a subcontractor. Pete will get into more detail there, but that work wrapped up in January of this year, and now that needs assessment will really provide the support for our program plan development as we work towards developing that program plan by February 1st of next year. In California, I said we were approved as the single pro in January of this year. The first major undertaking in California, as I know many of you have been following, is the rulemaking that CalRecycle kicked off last year as part of an informal rulemaking process. CAA was involved. We provided comments on those rules to CalRecycle during that informal rulemaking process last year. And the formal rulemaking process in California officially kicked off in January of this year, with a formal comment period opening up in March and closing May 8th. And we are now all in waiting mode as we wait for those rules to be promulgated sometime before January 1st of next year. CAA, as the approved pro in California, is also a member of the SB222 advisory board in California. In Oregon, like I said, CAA was the only pro to submit a program plan on April 1st of this year. We're working with Oregon DEQ, local governments, waste and recycling sector, other stakeholders in Oregon to develop out a revised program plan. It's a pretty major undertaking as we work to meet the expectations of the state, work to revise that program plan that will be resubmitted in September, and also work to begin really collecting a lot of the data that's needed in Oregon. The needs assessment that Oregon DEQ conducted before CAA was approved really focused on the needs of local governments. What are the needs that local governments need in terms of infrastructure, which is critical input and critical information, but there's other data in terms of system costs, et cetera, that CAA needs to continue to collect. So we'll be doing a lot of that work this summer ahead of that resubmission in September. And then, like I mentioned, we expect that that program plan to be approved sometime in November or December of this year. And then we'll look towards the launch date of the program in July of next year. And then in Maine, we've also been engaged in Maine. Maine doesn't select a pro until early 2026. They don't put out their RFP for pro selection until the fall of 25. So we have been involved with their stakeholder workshops last year, and including their formal rulemaking process into this year. But we've really been focusing the bulk of our attention and energy so far on those 3 Western states, given those tighter timelines. From a producer perspective, we are working to register producers right now. We have set a registration deadline of July 1st, 2024 across the 3 Western states for companies that believe they're likely to have obligations here under one of those state statutes. This is a really critical step from a producer perspective. It's really tough for any pro to set accurate fee schedules in particular without knowing how many producers and how much material they're supplying into a given state. So we really see this registration deadline as a critical next step for us to be successful and for us to help producers and these programs be successful across the states. We will be developing guidance for producers, including guidance for interaction with our reporting portal later this summer into the early fall. Our IT team is hard at work building out that reporting portal right now. And we anticipate having that portal ready to go in time for the first state reporting deadline, which will be March 31st of 2025 in Oregon. We then anticipate having the next section of the portal launched for Colorado and California, ready to go in August of 2025 for the first reporting deadlines in those states. So hopefully that gives you all a little bit of a sense here of CAA, who we are, where we came from, where we're at in the process. And Pete, I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to you to walk us through the Colorado statute and the needs assessment.
Perfect. Thanks, John.
Yep.
So I have way too many slides for not enough time, and I will say we're going to make sure to these slides will be provided afterwards. So there is some slides I may gloss over a little bit more, but it provides you with the information afterwards if there's follow-up questions that folks have. We just wanted to make sure you had as much information as possible. So thought it would be helpful again to sort of provide you with an idea as to sort of how the Colorado needs assessment process was undertaken. We've had a pretty tight timeline in Colorado. We were appointed, as John mentioned, as the pro about a year ago. Since that point, we have gone out to procure a third party to do our needs assessment. That needs assessment has been submitted. We had about 6 months for that third party to do that work. Not ideal, but we were able to deliver on that side. And now we are in the process right now of developing the program plan, which is due in February. So this is just sort of a bit of a timeline as to where we are. I think the process certainly means that we are continually, trying to plan and develop ahead of time. So the timelines are, to some degree, needs us to make sure we're thinking ahead at each stage. So before we were appointed the pro, we were already working on the needs assessment, development of the needs assessment. And I assume, as we move forward with the program plan, we'll be looking to make sure we've got things in line for actual implementation, because we need to implement 6 months after the plan is approved. Next slide over. This slide just really quickly just covers the key obligations of the different types of parties in Colorado. Just helpful to understand, every state's a little bit different as to what the requirements are for each group. And we've got another slide that'll deal specifically with the needs assessment. But in Colorado, we were required to conduct the needs assessment, develop the program plan. We are required to register all producers and collect data from them. And then develop on the outcomes established in the legislation, which include collection, hauling management, ensuring that we're engaging responsible end markets, providing education, and investing in infrastructure in the state to ensure better outcomes are achieved. So there is, again, a bit of a difference between each state, and really this is what's meant to lay that out. Next slide, John. I just want to be clear. Sometimes the terms get confused when we talk about the needs assessment and the program plan. The needs assessment in Colorado was really about saying, what is the baseline that's currently being achieved in Colorado? So what do we know that's currently in place? And really what that allows the pro to do is identify the gaps, identify opportunities to improve recycling, so that we can plan forward what is achievable within the state. And each state's going to be different. As Chaz mentioned earlier, each state's going to have differences in how collection is done, how processing is done, and all of that sort of baseline is going to help to inform the pro as to what's happening. In Colorado specifically, the needs assessment was also used to develop a set of scenarios, and that scenario, one of those scenarios was recommended by CDPHE, the department, and their joint budget committee then approved the recommendation that was put forward, and that sort of sets the boundaries for the pathway that the pro will take in meeting certain recycling targets, collection targets, and how they'll move forward. So again, the needs assessment really is all about, setting the what is currently happening, and the program plan is more about the how are we going to then move from where we are today to a new state where we obviously have improved recycling collection. We're facilitating better signals within the marketplace to improve many of the things that people have talked about today, which includes improving the current material management side, but also improving design decisions, so upstream decisions that might be made as well. Next slide. We just provided this just as a background because it is a bit different in Maryland from Colorado. In Colorado, we were leading the needs assessment process. We defined the scope. We hired the contractor, and we managed that contractor throughout the process. The state agency was, did help to approve. Once we had made a selection, they sort of blessed that selection as we move forward. They were responsible for, again, bringing forward a recommendation to the Joint Budget Committee as part of it. And then throughout the process, we engaged the advisory board as the needs assessment was developed. So we held, and I think Scott's DeFife is on the line, who was a part of that committee. We held meetings throughout that entire phase to get feedback from advisory board members as that process moved forward. Next slide. One more. So this just gives you an idea of the timeline that was in place. So again, a very tight timeline. We had, we released the RFP a couple of weeks after we were selected as the pro. We did get advice on the RFP that we were going out with from the advisory board. Then we had a turnaround to make sure that there was time for different firms to put forward contracts and to bid appropriately. We worked based on Colorado's procurement code to keep in line with exactly how the state was procuring services. And then we moved forward then in August. And during that August to January timeline, we reported as the research was being done to provide opportunities for input to make sure that we were capturing as much information as possible, and we were understanding nuances that might be being captured. So data is data. Like, data can tell you lots of things, but it doesn't necessarily get into some of the nuances of what's actually happening on the ground. And so getting some of the feedback from the advisory board during that process was extremely helpful. Next slide. I think Bradley mentioned this. There is, I assume, differences between what set of data that every jurisdiction will have. This was an assessment done by CDPHE. So there were 14 areas, elements that the needs assessment need to cover. And so they did an assessment around what the available data was for each of those areas. So as you'll see, the majority of those areas, there was very limited data that was involved or that was available through reports. And so there was a high degree of heavy lifting that needed to be done within Colorado to capture additional information to inform, what was happening in a number of different areas. Everything from, what's being collected, how are materials being managed, what are end markets that are in place, how is education being done. So lots of different areas. How is non-residential service, what is it available for? In Colorado, they capture several non-residential covered entities that included public spaces, government buildings, small businesses, hospitality. So we needed to look at how those businesses were receiving service. So again, the starting point on this was fairly low in all categories, and that necessitated a lot of heavy lifting. And when you think about the timeline that we had 6 months really to capture all this data. So to go out and capture it, do analysis, do data verification. It's quite a short period of time to get all of that work done and then do modeling on scenarios. Next slide. Again, this is just an outline of how we ran our needs assessment. We were required by law to meet the Colorado procurement code, and so we followed their procurement code to the T. We did hire a separate organization to help us draft, manage submittals, evaluate, and then the selection process. So we've just included on this slide a bit of the background as to how we evaluated those submissions that came in. We did receive 2 submissions, 2 complete good submissions that came back, and the companies that were chosen won on both sides, both on the non-price criteria and on the price criteria, and that was HDR and Eunomia who ended up moving forward with the needs assessment. Next slide, John. And just one more. I think we felt very comfortable. I think both of the proposals that came back, but I think the HDR Eunomia submission had a lot of elements that I thought we thought were very helpful. So they had broad overall national understanding of the recycling and the compost systems that are in place, collection, processing, and markets. They had people that were experienced on the EPR side. They had lots of local partners that were included to, again, ensure that we were clearly understanding different elements. And Colorado has lots of unique pockets, and so important to understand what's happening on the ground on that side. They had a great approach on data gathering. I will talk about data. Data is always a problem when it comes to waste management. I'm always skeptical of anyone that says they have great data within their jurisdiction, because as you start digging into data around waste, it's always important to understand where potential fragility may exist in that data, and how to potentially overcome some of those challenges. Next slide over, John. So we were very successful in that time period in getting feedback through. So we had over 70 tours and interviews, so understanding on the ground what was happening at each of those facilities. There are obviously times when you may not get complete data back from different players within the industry. So being able to be at their facilities and understand what's happening at those facilities is important. We had 130 surveys that were completed by local governments across the state. We had a number of state advisory board meetings that were held during that process to seek feedback. And then we've received significant amount of comments through the process, through the advisory board itself, and through public comments coming back that we received and responded to as the needs assessment was developed. Next slide over, John. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I've got a lot of slides here that just talk about each of the elements. So what did the needs assessment need to capture as part of it? So we talk about what the purpose of each element was, what the approach that was taken for each, and then what considerations that gave us to sort of look at for each of those elements. And so each of these elements that were provided provides insight to the pro on how to develop the program plan. It may also provide information for us as well about implementation. So we need to really understand exactly what's happening on the ground. So, for example, like demographics, we want to understand what's happening on the ground. So population sizes, densities, languages that might be within the jurisdiction that will inform promotion and education. Ages of people and how people are actually receive feedback. Like there are lots of areas within this that I think were quite helpful in us understanding the broader picture, and then help us to look at how we might implement moving forward. Next slide, John. And I'll just quickly go over. I mean, again, we looked at contamination. So what is the current contamination? What are we starting with? How much contamination is there within the current system, and how might we look at sort of best practices to reduce that contamination? What's the performance, and how are non-residential entities being serviced? That is a difficult area to get information on because it's not generally captured well by service providers or by a lot of state governments. It tends to be an area that's a gap area. And so there's different ways that need to be approached to capture that data. Next slide, John. So we looked at as well processing capacity. So what is the ability for the system right now to take in new materials, to take on more materials? So what does the structure of the current system look like? And that then informs us to look at what materials potentially could be accepted. Where can we look at expansions or adjustments that need to be made within that system to moving forward to improve the outcomes that are currently happening. We did look at opportunities and costs as well, so that sort of fits with that processing capacity. We looked at the compost side as well to understand transfer infrastructure, so where materials are getting moved within the state itself. Next slide, John. We had to establish a minimum recyclables list. So what material is going to be collected in a statewide approach right across the state? What material might be collected in maybe a lesser form? So maybe it's not collected in every state or in every jurisdiction curbside, but might be collected at a depot or might be collected slightly differently. And so we ran through a process of really then assessing how do we look at how many programs are currently accepting materials, where might there be problems with sorting those materials, where might be there problems with end markets, and what are there detrimental things. And I think Bradley, you spoke earlier to used oil containers, so looking at materials like that might end up in the collection stream that may create problems for other materials that are being captured. And then again, spend a lot of time looking at end markets and where the opportunities are to expand those markets, improve those markets moving forward. Next slide, John. We did also look at new technologies, so understanding where we might have potential opportunities to improve outcomes at MRFs or collection facilities. So that could include everything from, new sorting equipment at MRFs to new collection techniques that help to reduce contamination. We looked at the reuse system and where the current reuse system sits in Colorado to understand potentially what the impacts of the system might have and where we might seek to look at improvements. Next slide, John. We looked at education and how education was being what is the best practice in Colorado right now, and how might we look to leverage and build upon that system. In Colorado, we are required to fund infrastructure developments at compost facilities to reduce the amount of contamination that those facilities are receiving, and to improve the infrastructure to improve the effectiveness of processing compostable materials. So we were looking at what's currently happening in that infrastructure. Next slide, John. All of that work then culminated to us looking at developing 3 scenarios for Colorado, looking at the impacts that they would have on collection and recycling rates, and also operating and capital costs for 2030 and 2035. So we tried to zero in on what are the types of factors in each of the scenarios that might impact costs and might impact performance. So we looked at things like access. So how do we ensure access, greater access right across the state? When is that put in place? How collection might be provided, curbside, single stream, dual stream, that type of thing. What materials would be collected and how we might increase materials over a period of time. Infrastructure investments. And then we also did look at waste generation. So how might we look at factors that might impact waste generation moving forward? We know potentially there is lots of elements right now that are impacting generation rates policy-wise that could impact that side. So trying to understand what might happen on that side. And from those, we developed then a low, a medium, and a high scenario that were put forward as options for the needs assessment and for the consideration by CDPHE and the Joint Budget Committee to select one of those recommendations. The advisory board did provide feedback to us throughout that process as we developed the scenarios and what the options were that are included in those scenarios. And then also provided some input on the recommended scenario, though that was a CDPHE decision on their own. Next slide. So this just sort of outlines the scenario that was chosen, some of the elements that were part of that scenario. So how curbside servicing would be provided, the frequency of that servicing, and some of the different areas around investment and such, and sort of what that might look for the state of Colorado for improving recycling rates and the amount of materials that are currently being collected. Next slide, John. And I'll try to speed myself up because I think I just have a few more slides. But just from a lessons learned perspective, I think there's a few areas that we would definitely highlight. I think there is a need right at the outset to set the stage for effective collaboration. So how do you clearly ensure that the advisory board, the State Department, and the PRO understand their roles clearly throughout the process, so that everybody knows exactly what their role is moving forward? And I think at times during the needs assessment, there was at times, I think, a bit of confusion in Colorado on that side. And so I think there's an opportunity, or there would be an opportunity around that side to make sure that is clear at the outset, so that everybody understands where their roles and responsibilities lie. Next slide over, John. Timelines of scope are really important. Chaz, I think mentioned earlier about the fact that it's important to get things right. When you have tight timelines, they really do have an impact. Data collection does take time. People do take time to get information back. I will say time, even when we talk about to sign non-disclosure agreements, if groups want that type of an agreement to be in place, that can sometimes take 2 or 3 weeks just in back and forth in getting those NDAs signed. So that does take time to be able to ensure that that's taken care of. The data analysis side takes time. You need time to be able to make sure that you can look at the data, do a quality control on the data that you've received, and make sure that it's correct. And then again, you need some ability to make sure that you're getting feedback back, and that you've got appropriate time to actually think through what's coming through and be able to properly respond to it. If you're going to have a tight time limit in place, there's a need also then to say, is the scope right? Are you addressing all of the things that need to get addressed? Is there a way to narrow down what you're asking for? And so I think those two things, you need to find a balance on that side moving forward. to make sure that the needs assessment is success. There is success in that needs assessment, that you're adequately covering what you need to cover within the timeline set out. Next slide, John. So I think that, the project team, HDR Unomi did quite a good job on this in their setup. I think they did have processes built in, understanding that data is always an issue. And I will say data is always an issue when it comes to waste. So you will get times when there's insufficient data. There's no requirements potentially at this point to collect the type of data that we're talking about. So, that always potentially can be an issue. There might be smaller, or there might be some even the larger operators that may not be collecting and tracking the data in a way that these programs need to do moving forward. So the type of information may not be available to the same type of level that you would want to see for needs assessment. I mentioned non-residential materials already, but there is generally a gap on that side. I'm yet to find a state that doesn't have an issue on that side. Data is not always uniformly captured as well. So when we talk about waste composition audits, not every municipal government or service provider will use the same data categories. They may not assess things in exactly the same way. How do they deal with moisture? How do they deal with issues like that? So the data that you might get may not be readily comparable side to side. Contamination often gets measured in very different ways and is not uniformly tracked. Are we talking about bowling balls and hoses, or are we talking about other types of unaccepted packaging materials? And so understanding those types of things moving forward is quite helpful. But again, it's not always, when we go out to do these needs assessments, it's not always done in it's not always in a form that you might want it. And then disclosure, even though data may be available, there might be groups that might be unwilling to provide it. And certainly understand, I've worked with the private waste sector for some time. There is certainly information that I understand is they consider to be market sensitive, commercial confidential. And certainly understand the reason for them saying that, but that does make it difficult when you need, to some degree, access to some of that information to be able to perform evaluations. And so we tried to do this within the needs assessment in Colorado, but making sure that there are different ways that you can approach the data to fact check and correct, and make sure that if what you expect to be available isn't exactly what you need, that you've got a backup plan to actually address and assess the information in a different way. And I think that's my last slide, John. So I will stop talking, and I apologize that I've spoken for too long.
All right. I think, Chris, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a quick question. Peter, thanks for the presentation. I thought it was pretty in-depth. What have you seen as the lead time on accepting additional materials, just from a processor standpoint? Obviously, we would have to change some of our infrastructure, equipment, et cetera. So just interested on the feedback you've had on the lead time.
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend to some degree on what we're talking about, right? So there are some materials potentially that might be easier for the waste sector to take in more quickly. But it all depends really a little bit, Chris, on the infrastructure that's in place. So those are discussions that we need to have with the private sector and other operators within the system to understand what is it going to take, what's the infrastructure gap, or what's the gap. Sometimes it can be just simply a market gap, and maybe there's a market we can identify. Sometimes it's a sorting gap, and sorting gaps could be much larger because your facility might not have the space to be able to implement the type of change that we're talking about in a quick manner. So I think it really depends on what we're talking about adding for us to be able to sort of provide a clear answer on that.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah,
the
we're
conversation.
in the process of, building a new facility in Elkridge that I mentioned at the top. So, the quicker we can get that type of information, I know we got the process play out, and we need to take Fritos bags or Doritos bags, that type of stuff. I guess we'll let it play out.
Yeah, Chris, what I can say is I think there's a definite interest in producers to collect more flexible packaging, which is an area that certainly the waste sector has had concerns about in processing that material within their facilities. It's a more difficult material to process. But I think there's a definite interest on that side, and I think we're trying to work with the waste sector right now to figure out how do we achieve that. Certainly you can collect the material separately, not curbside, but when you do that, you potentially don't get the same amount of material that would come back through the curbside.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Alrighty, if there are no other questions, again, we will be posting this presentation. CAA, I think you have a more in-depth presentation that's recorded on your website as well, so we can point people to that as well, because I do know that we had some limited time. Next, we're going to be moving to Chaz Miller on a markets update. I get to see these updates on a monthly basis, and I must say it's one of my favorite parts about helping to contribute to NERC. So Chaz?
Brad, can you put my slides up? Because I have discovered that on Google Meet is not compatible with Apple. What a shocker. Especially if you use the Apple browser.
All right. Let me...
A warning there about monopolies in some ways. And well, I can start working on it now, and then I'm just going to have to ask you to move each slide.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm going to be using prices from recyclingmarkets.net. They get their data from MRFs throughout the country. So these are MRF selling prices. Covers all the curbside recyclables. My speaker notes, which you will receive as part of a PDF, have a wealth of data in them, because I prefer to do a presentation and not have you all die by PowerPoint. So you'll get the PDF. It'll have a lot of data that's going to be very useful to everybody. So don't take about a lot of extensive notes. Next slide.
My presentation button isn't working. Oh, wait. Swamp.
Yeah, next slide, please. Great. Sorry about this, Brad. Very simple. This picture comes from Montgomery County. It's our dual stream program we're very proud of. And all these recyclables, they're simply raw materials looking for buyers. And those buyers want consistent quantity at a consistent quality at an acceptable price. Next slide. And there's some key factors affecting recycling markets. First of all, markets vary by material. What you can say about plastic, for instance, you simply can't say about paper. These are commodities. Their prices fluctuate. That's the nature of commodities. Very important is the state of the economy today, but equally important is where those buyers, who are mostly purchasing agents looking for raw materials for either to make packages, to make products, or to make the boxes those products are going to be shipped in, where do they think the economy is going to be in 60 days or so when they need those raw materials? Secondly, product unit sales are incredibly important, because the more products that are sold, the more unit sales you have of packages, frankly, the stronger markets are for recycling. And we're seeing this today in particular for some of the, for a lot of product unit sales are down. And you see this in the quarterly reports from product companies. They talk about revenues way up. That's inflation, by the way. Unit sales are down. That's also inflation. And that's a very key thing that a lot of companies are dealing with. And finally, the housing and infrastructure construction, because a lot of recyclables end up in construction markets. And for instance, when it comes to color HDPE, There's a fascinating correlation between where those markets are and the number of housing starts in the economy. Next slide. You're going to see this slide a lot. It's very similar. There are differences between the different markets, but there's also certain similarities. They tend to go down when COVID started. They peaked at one time or another. They went down. And then most of the markets have been going up in the last couple of months. Aluminum cans, 72.5 cents per pound. That's a very good price for aluminum. Next slide. And this is what they become. They become aluminum cans because the only thing you can make out of that alloy is the can. Next slide. Steel cans, its own little weird slide with very low after COVID, then it pops up. $222.50 per ton, been pretty steady at that price for a while. Next slide. And what does the steel can become? Well, I am hoping that some of my steel cans in about 5 or 10 years become part of the new Key Bridge, because an aluminum can, given America's reliance on the electric arc furnace, can be used for anything, because the electric arc furnace is built for scrap and it takes all kinds of steel scrap. Next slide. Glass is the only material I do not keep a graph on for a very simple reason. The slide rarely change, the price rarely changes. Flint, $57.50 per ton. Amber, which is brown, $37.50 per ton. Green, $10 per ton. And if you got mixed color, you're going to pay a fee to the processor to process it. And I say it doesn't change often. Those prices have changed maybe twice since I started tracking these at the beginning of 2020. Next slide. Under a deposit system and under some of the dual stream systems, you can take glass bottles and make new bottles out of them. But you have to keep those colors separated because the color stays, unfortunately. Next slide. The other option is mixed glass, cullet. The market for this doesn't care about color. It can be fiberglass, it can be aggregate, it can be some really weird uses, such as, for instance, the bead in reflective paint is glass cullet. Next. Now, we're getting to OCC corrugated containers, paper, $110 a ton. And you note how that price has risen since February of last year. One of the best markets out there. It has started to flatten out. It's 110 per ton. And there's a reason for that. Remember when I talked about an acceptable price? This is a very expensive raw material for the paper industry. International Paper, in its most recent quarterly report, noted that it is spending $25 million more at the end of the first quarter on OCC than it did a year previously. That's why this price factor, sometimes you get a great price because if you're a MRF, you love this price. If you're the buyer, Next slide. And this is what those boxes become. They become the materials that become new boxes. The liner board and the corrugated medium, that fluting between the outer layers. Next slide. Residential mixed papers. Now their prices tend to track those of OCC because essentially they're a supplement to OCC. And you see the same that you saw on it. Then you see again this increase. It went up from 0 to $67.50 a ton now. And it actually went up this last month, unlike corrugated. And the reason it went up was the price of corrugated got so high. They're looking for alternative fiber when they can get it. Next slide. What do you make mixed paper into? You can make it into just about any kind of paper product, pizza boxes, molded pulp, different kinds of paper grades. Next slide, please. Okay, let's get into the plastics. And one thing I want to mention that is very common between the two I just showed you and this one and the next one, the two paper and these two HDPEs, they both peaked roughly in September of 21 in price, and then they all went down. The others peaked on different parts of that timeline, but it's fascinating the way those four were in sync on peaking and then going down. And there's a reason for that. And quite frankly, a lot of it is CFOs woke up one day, they realized what they were paying for raw material, and they said, we're going to have to cut back on some of this higher price stuff. Natural HDPE, 35.5 cents per pound. It's a highly versatile material. It's milk jugs, it's water jugs. It's a translucent, undyed material. Next slide. And what it tends to go into is color HDPE bottles. Why? Because there's not a lot of letters of non-objection to use recycled PET for milk, although there are some out there, but it's a good market. They will pay for it, and they like this. But it's only as an inner layer because they like those, they dye for marketing reasons. And because they dye the resin, you cannot use that resin to make new bottles out of unless you want gray bottles, or you're going to use the resin as the inner liner. Next slide. The colors, the markets for color HDPE, and this is another thing I want to introduce at this point. You see how it got low right after COVID hit. Now it's well above where it was when COVID hit. Aluminum, steel, corrugated, mixed paper are all well above they were in those COVID lows, which are pretty serious lows. Natural HDPE, unfortunately, is not as good now as it was before COVID hit. It's still below that. Secondly, you look at the price for color, it's gone up very nicely. And part of the reason for that is the correlation with new housing starts. Next slide. Because the end market for color HDPE, because it is colored, it often becomes pipe. Pipe for sewer lines, pipe for constructions. It is a great market. This is a material that can last 50 to 100 years and totally displaces virgin resin. This particular slide comes from ADS, which is a company that makes a great deal of pipe using a heavy amount of recycled content. Next slide. PET. One of the weirder slides in some ways, especially with the drop. But you also see with PET a steady rise since July of 23. It's now up to 16.75 cents per pound. By the way, there's a reason I use Northeast prices. First of all, I make these for the Northeast Recycling Council, but also because these are the markets Maryland relies on. These are the markets that we use. And frankly, we have better markets on the eastern side of the country than the West Coast does. For a number of reasons. One has to do with the concentration of paper facilities east of the Mississippi and the concentration of plastic facilities east of the Mississippi. And frankly, west of the Mississippi, markets are much smaller. And in the case of the state of California, they didn't do squat to help improve their paper recycling infrastructure. Next slide. So PET can become PET bottles. Currently, bottles are now the largest market for PET bottles recycled. Next slide, please. However, it was fiber products, carpet, insulation, clothing fiber. That's what created recycling for PET. Back in the mid-'80s, Wellman, Mohawk, and some other companies saw what they could see in PET recycle. And only recently have they now become the second largest market. And it's largely because carpet is way out of favor. The carpet sales are down tremendously over the last 20 years. Next slide. Polypropylene. Unfortunately, another one that's just barely above where it was when COVID started. 7.25 cents per pound. It was very slow until then. And the reason the price came up, I'll mention a couple of slides from now, but it has to do with expanded market. Next slide. They make these into paint pails. They make these into durable products. It can be made into fiber. It can be made into garden tools. And the problem with that is the durable markets for plastics are not very strong at the moment. Next slide. So you look at these materials by their per ton value. Aluminum is clearly the class leader, around almost $1,500 a ton. Natural HDPE around close to $700. Color HDPE close to $500. And then you get down to paper, 110 a ton, RMP. However, if you look at this, next slide, please, in terms of value at a MRF, and this is something we've been tracking at NERC since the second quarter of 2019. You see it too, that value too really peaked in the third quarter of 2021. All those markets were incredibly strong. Then they started going down, but what you see at the end with the fourth quarter numbers, and the numbers really over the last year, what's made it stable and increased it is the strength of those paper markets. If you look at recycling markets as a cake, paper is the substance, it's the cake, it's the weight, it's the volume. Everything else, aluminum, plastics, they're like the icing on the cake, because functionally a MRF is a paper recycling facility with add-ons. So you have to keep that in mind when you look at markets. Next slide, please. Let's talk about exports. So we export recyclables for a very simple reason. Somebody pays more for them than we do, and they're willing to pay more, and they're willing to pay to ship across the ocean. And by the way, we export very few aluminum cans, very little cullet. We export, when we do data for exports, metal and paper are in millions of tons. Plastic is in hundreds of millions of pounds. It's a significant difference in what we actually export. Next slide. We look at paper exports. This is starting in 2016, and 2024 is the first quarter projected throughout the year. You see a significant decline, almost 22 million tons in 2016. It's going to be about 13 million tons in 2024. But we're going to be exporting paper for a long time for a very simple reason. We exported a lot of jobs and a lot of manufacturing overseas in the late 90s and the first decade of the aughts. And because of that, we also exported making the boxes for those products overseas, because it's a lot cheaper to make the boxes where the products are being made than to ship unopened flat boxes overseas. Next slide. Plastic exports collapsed tremendously when China pulled the plug on imports of recycled plastics. About 3.7 billion pounds in 2017. It's going to be a little bit under a billion pounds, like 920 or so in 2024. It's worth noting that Canada and Mexico get the majority of the plastics that we export. It's also worth noting that it's mostly mixed plastics, and it's film and non-bottle rigids. Next slide. I want to talk about a little bit about increased capacity to use recycled content in the paper and the plastic industries. This is a picture of a new pulper at a mill in the state of Washington. That's not a small piece of equipment. That's a very expensive piece of equipment. Yet the paper industry has done a stunning job in increasing its ability to use recycled content as a raw material. Next slide. We've been tracking this at NERC also. This expansion started in about 2015 with the rise of e-commerce. The new capacity started coming online in 2017. It was either expanded capacity to use OCC and residential mixed paper at a mill. It was either converting a paper machine into a packaging machine, or it was a brand new mill. And when you're talking brand new mill, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. 24 projects completed, potential overall capacity increase of 8 million tons. However, this new capacity has also caused older, less efficient capacity to close. So the total increase, maybe 4 million tons. One facility opened this year, Total Refiber Republic down in Chesapeake, Virginia. Next, in 2026, Graphics Packaging will open a facility in Texas. It's a fascinating plant. They're actually closing 3 older, inefficient facilities. They're going to replace that capacity, but they're also adding on 5 or 10% more because they see a lot of potential in plastics to paper shifts. Next slide, please. Let's look at plastic. This is the ExxonMobil Baytown chemical recycling plant in Baytown, Texas. There's a lot of data on this particular slide on all the pre-24 expansions. Next slide, please. 24 and on, there's a couple of these of note. The Hazleton one, that's mixed plastic, that's great for this area. Republic Services, the publicly traded hauling and recycling company, now has got one open and one about to open, where they don't just bale plastics to sell the bale. Instead of baling it, they make either flake or pellets at that facility that they can then sell to end markets. It's tremendous thing that they're doing. Oddly, I don't have it on this, but KW is expanding a wash line at their facility in Alabama, and that's one of the reasons color prices have gone up, and then one of the reasons polypropylene suddenly went up. They need to establish the supply line to draw those raw materials into their facility. The one at the bottom, My Place, it's not a good story. They opened a great fanfare in December. They closed for downtime in March. Who knows when and if they'll reopen. Next slide. So where are markets headed? Well, it's all about the economy. And the problem with this economy, when I took Econ 101 more years ago than I care to remember, my professor never used the word pandemic in his discussion of economics. My last public presentation before COVID was in Connecticut in January of 2020. To my embarrassment, I never used the word pandemic when I was making predictions for markets. Things happen to upset predictions. Next slide. Where is the economy going? Well, probably into a soft landing, although I've heard economists in the Fed hoping for that for about 4 years now. Good news, inflation is down slightly. Job growth is down. Wage growth is slowing. Retail sales went down in April. Warehouse vacancy rate is up. That means a lot of inventories are getting depleted. Trucking rates are down. That means the trucking industry needs more business. The two that I care about the most, Institute of Supply Management and their manufacturing and their new orders indices, what they are showing is negative in terms of expansion. And these are the guys who are making those purchase orders for those raw materials that are made out of recyclables. And they're saying they are negative again on manufacturing activity. 50 is the cut line between contracting and growing economy. And manufacturing has been below 50 for most of the last 4 years. New orders also went down below. Again, it's been below 50 for most of the last 4 years. You look at consumer sentiment, down. Consumer spending is tightening. Remember what I said about unit sales. A 2% decline in unit sales at America's grocery stores in April of 24 compared to a year before. And a very fascinating piece of data from the Fed, pandemic savings are gone. We're now starting to pay everything on money that wasn't money we saved because of the pandemic. Next slide. Some unique drivers for paper recycling. There's very strong demand because of this new capacity, very aggressively competing for supply for OCC and RMP. Supply is weak. Lower product sales mean that retail stores are generating less OCC. And it's that commercial OCC that is the prettiest recyclable out there. Residential supply is failing to step up. I chaired Montgomery County's Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force. One of our major recommendations to the county was you've got to step it up on OCC recovery. You've got to get those boxes out of the transfer station into the recycling stream. Box shipments are down, not only year over year, they're also down in the first quarter. And that again forces some economic downtime. Next slide. On the recycled plastics side, very simple. Recycled plastic is no longer less expensive than virgin. That's always been its strong point. Too much virgin resin is being produced globally. There's an extraordinary global oversupply of virgin resin. Too much cheap recycled resin is coming into this country as imports. And there's also a lot of domestic off-spec resin. PET, PE polyethylene, prices are rising for virgin resin, but not enough to make a difference. Where are seasonal markets going, including beverage consumption and construction? Well, the good news is housing starts are up. The good news is starts remain above 1 million for the 6th consecutive month. And remember what I said about Kohler HDPE and the correlation with prices and single-family housing starts. On the other hand, consumer spending on goods is soft. And that is probably not going to change for a while. Next slide. So, final predictions. Markets beyond May. Paper prices, it peaked. Well, myself and a lot of guys who've been tracking paper for a long time thought they were going to peak 3 months ago, and they still haven't, although they may have flattened out. And the only thing that's actually right now keeping them down is that exports are down. Export demand is down. If the export markets get back to where they can be, those prices will go up for paper. Plastic prices are very slowly rising. Metal prices are solid, absolutely solid, but still wait and see how well seasonal sales are for bottled water, for beer, for soft drinks, and how construction goes. Key trends to watch for. Consumers, are they going to continue cutting back on spending due to inflation? What about dwindling savings? This is well known now in the economy. Will housing construction pick up? And interesting enough, on cutting back on spending, those of you who read the Washington Post, there was an article last week, there was an article also in Marketplace about how a lot of big brands are cutting prices because they need to get consumers to get back in the stores to buy things. Wild cards. Hey, Mexico is now a bigger exporter of products to this country than China. What's that mean, especially for paper markets? What's the hurricane season going to be like this year? They're forecasting a very negative hurricane season. Half your petrochemical refinery capacity in this country is in the Gulf Coast. And if there is a serious storm that causes serious problems in some of those refineries, well, it's good for recycling, terrible for a whole lot of other stuff. And what about things such as Ukraine and Israel? How will they play out? What impact will they have? Next slide. These are my sources, among many of them. And next slide. This is my email address, my contact information. Again, I'm happy to send the PDF to everybody, and it will be available through MDE. And Brad, thank you so much for your help on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for such a great presentation. Now, we are out of time, but I do want to open the floor up to the public for any comment, considerations that have to do with the impending EPR legislation or the needs assessment.
Hey, Bradley, I just have a general question. Is there a targeted recycling percentage in mind with this program?
So goals will definitely be a part of the plan. That is something that is going to have to be negotiated through the legislative process. I know there were goals that were in the previous law, and that Tyler said that that's going to be our starting point, so that we don't have to draw something from or develop something from scratch, and then we'll make adjustments to that as well. But at this point, we don't have any goals. That's going to be hashed out through the legislative process. Although we do have an executive order, and maybe Dave Murdich, if he's still on the call, can talk a little bit about that. The state does have goals to meet certain recycling rates by 2035.
For the interest of time, let's not have Dave describe that today. Scott, I know you have a comment, and then we can conclude here so we can all get to our 11 o'clock meetings, because I certainly have one.
Thanks, Tyler. I wrote some of my comments in the chat because I knew that we were probably going to be bumping up against time. But I think it just needs to be said that while recyclingmarkets.net and some of the sources that Chaz has here are entirely accurate snapshots of what MRFs will get paid for their products right now, you know, each material is very different. The end markets are very different, and quality matters a lot. And all of that is seen through the eyes of the current existing single stream system, which in many cases is producing subpar quality or highly contaminated material that depresses the price on the open market. Chaz and I can talk about needing to update the file on glass. We can take that offline because we don't need to, you know, have communities and counties sorting colors. But we really need to look beyond just single stream. Even as the comment was made earlier, and Peter knows this because I'm a broken record on this in Colorado, there are some materials that are highly recyclable but don't belong in the single stream. They don't work well. Film, I'm sure all of my MRF friends here are reluctant to have flexible film through their existing facilities. And sometimes, you know, certain materials have a much higher, closer end market value close to home if they're collected separately in a cleaner stream.
Thank you.
All right, anything else from the public? Peter?
Yeah, hi, Peter Blair. I'm an attorney for Just Zero. We worked on a lot of the existing EPR programs. Just wanted to flag, as you're having these discussions about the different programs, it's extremely important to understand they were all created with significantly different goals, so they're all going to look different. So while it's important to understand the legislative landscape in these other programs, you really need to figure out what Maryland wants to do in order to come up with legislative language that'll actually be impactful. Colorado does not have a lot of recycling services, so their program is mostly focused on expanding recycling services. That's not something that is probably going to be analogous to Maryland. So just something to keep in mind as you're going through the different programs and having these conversations.
All right, anything else from the public? And that's definitely a good comment. All right, seeing nothing else, I think we are ready to put a lid on this packaging EPR advisory council, and we will make sure that everyone gets the material, and we will also put out a link to our website as well, which will have everything as well. And then I don't know if we have the next one actually on the calendar, but we will be inviting everyone to that as well. If you want someone to be at that meeting, please send me an email. I do have a running email list where I'm adding people to that. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the conversation. Thank you, presenters, and we will see you in July.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.